Hello, my name is Naya Blair Hackworth. My pronouns are she and her, and I serve as the Director of Inclusion in the NCAA Office of Inclusion. Thank you for joining us today for the Building and Sustaining Your Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council webinar. Today's event is sponsored by the NCAA Office of Inclusion and the Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Council for Excellence, also known as DICE. Before the start of today's program, the NCAA Office of Inclusion invites you to acknowledge and honor the Indigenous communities native to our region. We recognize that the NCAA National Office sits upon the land of the Miami, Lenape peoples, and the wider Indiana region encompass the homelands of the Kickapoo, Shawnee, Peoria, and Potawatomi peoples. We acknowledge the genocide and systems of oppression that have dispossessed Indigenous people of their lands. And we pay respect to elders, both past and present. We recognize that we are caretakers of the land and not its sole owners. We also want to acknowledge that November is National Native American Heritage Month. And while we highlight, educate, and celebrate the contributions of Indigenous peoples, let us be reminded that our acknowledgement should go beyond November. Today's program is an example of the Office of Inclusion's commitment to provide support and resources for the athletic, diversity, and inclusion designee community. We are grateful to join with groups like DICE to bring you educational programs based on your needs that were shared in the AD/ID survey conducted earlier this year. I would now like to introduce Sheridan Blanford, the Associate Athletic Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Washington, and the Executive Director of DICE, who will provide information about DICE and what today's program entails. Sheridan?
Wonderful. Thank you, Naya, so much for having us. Great to be in space with all of you in the waiting room. For those of you that have attended DICE meetings, you know we always like to get a little hype before we start with content. So we're listening to a little This Is How We Do It by Montel Jordan. So that's how we're starting and coming into this space. But we just want to say thank you so much for having us. We're really, really excited to be here. And without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Awesome. Can you all see this? Can I get a thumbs up for those that are awesome? Okay, so as Naya mentioned, we are here to represent the Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Council of Excellence, or as we like to call ourselves, DICE. And we're here to talk to you a little bit about building and sustaining your Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. So we just want to, again, start off by thanking the NCAA, Naya, Abigail, the Office of Inclusion for this partnership. And I'm looking forward to our time together today. So we're going to go and get started. So just a little bit of an overview. We're going to tell you a little bit about what DICE is for those of you that are not familiar. We're going to then dive into how we normally conduct our DICE meetings and talk to you a little about what that looks like, where we'll do a small presentation. And then what is like very integrous, what we hold ourselves to is what we learn from our peers. So we're going to have some peer-to-peer reflection through breakout rooms. So get ready for that. And then we will have a Q&A for those questions that we might miss or not answer throughout our time today. So that's just a little bit of an overview of where we're going. So DICE, who we are is the DICE was created a couple years ago. It started off between myself and Dewan Baker, who is now the Associate Athletic Director at the University of Colorado. But we were amongst just a very, very, very small few individuals who were doing DEI work in sport in a full-time capacity. And Dewan and I kind of put our heads together, and it was like, where is everybody at, and how can we connect with each other, and how can we support each other? Because the work that we're doing as diversity inclusion professionals, now designated as ADIDs, is super, super, super unique, very new, and there's not really a blueprint to do what we do. We can pull best practices from Fortune 500 companies, from nonprofit, from higher education, but as we all know, college athletics is its own unique beast. Therefore, we wanted to create an opportunity for ADIDs, folks within sport who do DEI work, to connect. So what we do is we get together to discuss, evaluate, and create tangible solutions that drive intentional growth toward increased diversity, equitable, and inclusive excellence within college athletics. So what we do is we connect with all of the new and emerging leaders within this area so that we can first and foremost connect with each other and know where each other is at. We then come together to learn and engage with strategies, best practices, discuss programs, policies, initiatives, et cetera, that we're working toward on each of our individual campuses. And also in specific areas, we have some folks that are outside of sport or outside of college sport doing this work. And then the last part, which is really cool, which is what we're here to do today, is we are coming together to utilize our own experience and expertise as folks within this role to grow our reach and intentionality of diversity, equity, inclusion in sports. So how can we use all these experiences that we're having and, spread our knowledge, spread what we know to different areas. What's really unique about the ADID is, we quite literally cover and touch all the different areas within sports. So how can we use our observations, our experience, our expertise to really help, continue the momentum of inclusive excellence? So we are a very ADID, diversity inclusion professionals focused organization. We're here to center all of you as we all are kind of in this together and trying to figure it out. So we're just super thankful for this opportunity. So just a little bit about our DICE organizational structure is we have an advisory board, we have an executive team. The executive team you'll be hearing a lot from today. And then we have a handful of different areas that we've separated ourselves into, in which you can review on the screen there. But really overall is to kind of cover all the areas in which we would touch within the DEI space. So just from a visual perspective, our advisory board is made up of the following individuals. They are just recently started over the last few months. It was a new organizational shift that we created coming into academic year 2021-22. And these are all experts in their respective areas that really help continue to guide and provide us on our direction as we continue to make impact with this newer DEI role. And the fantastic executive team in which you will hear from today is made up of individuals in various roles from around the country. I think we do cover almost every single geographical region, but we are all doing this work in a very different capacity and add a lot of great value to this space. So we are coming together to present this, this great information to you all today. So that's a little bit about DICE. Just quickly, as I had mentioned, we have monthly meetings. And ultimately, our goal is to, again, get together, share best practices, and connect with one another. So what we're going to do is we're quite literally going to take you through the structure similar to how we would run our normal DICE meeting. So with that, what we're going to start off with is we're going to start off with a brief presentation put together by all of us, shared by a few of us, but our goal is to just really provide perspective from our specific areas and collectively as a DICE executive team. And then what we'll do is we'll move into breakout rooms so that you all can also share what's going super, super well on your campuses with regard to your, what we're going to coin now as our DEI teams, or your council, your committee, your task forces, and then also share some challenges, because ultimately what we also position ourselves to do as DICE is we want to have real conversations. We want to know what's going wrong. We want to know what you're struggling with, because then ultimately what we can do as an organization is position ourselves to then create resources, opportunities to really dive deep into some of those challenges or issues. So we will get started. As Naya had mentioned at the beginning, we are here to talk to you about building and sustaining your diversity, equity, and inclusion council, or team, as we'll call it. So get to continue to hang out with me and listen to me, and then I'll pass it to one of my peers. But what we're going to do is just lay the foundation. So here's a few different areas that we're going to touch on today: is determining the why, establishing the structure of your team and getting buy-in, what stakeholders need to be involved, thinking about that in your respective area, and then last but not least, taking action. So the author and writer, Simon Sinek, wrote the book. It's a very solid book. If you haven't read it, it's called Start With Why. And what Simon says says your why is your purpose, cause, belief, or determinant of why anyone should care. And why we start with this, why, right? Why we start with this is to really center ourselves on why we are developing a DEI team, council, task force, et cetera. And this is a really, really important place to start. It is the most important place to start, because in Simon Sinek's book or TED Talk, he really talks about that your why is what's going to anchor you and keep you moving to get to where you ultimately desire to be. And oftentimes people don't start with that. They'll start with that action, or they'll start with how they're going to do things, but they're not starting with like, why are you starting a council? Why are you doing this? So what I'm going to take you through is give you a visual of a great graphic created by DR Works called the Effective Problem Solving Model. And you can see there's 6 steps, and it's a cycle. So it's ongoing, but you can see as a part of that, starting with awareness of an issue or a challenge, building or connecting with your community, then moving to information gathering and analysis, moving to vision and planning, taking action, and then reflection and evaluation. And ultimately what happens is a lot of us, as we all witnessed last year, is we go directly from awareness to action. It's like we're aware of a problem and let's just act. We saw it last year. We were all experienced the social injustice of Black and brown bodies last year. And ultimately what happened, giving a very explicit example, is folks were made aware of this, hyper aware to this, and it was like, okay, first thing, let's make a statement. However, that statement didn't hold any water because there was not a connection to really understand what the community needed, to gather information, to validate that, create a plan, and then ultimately act. Statements don't hold a lot of water if there's not something followed up with it. So ultimately our goal is to really evaluate our why is by becoming aware of a challenge or something that we're trying to do, particularly with our DEI council, and then going through the necessary steps. So we really need to be aware, connect with our community, gather the necessary information, and then go to that vision planning place before we ultimately take action. So starting with awareness and connecting with your community, what are the challenges and areas of opportunity with regard to forming your DEI team? Asking yourself the following questions, evaluating your why. Why do we need to develop this team? Is there a new DEI professional that was hired? Is there a large incident or challenge that took place? Has there been a pattern of internal discriminatory instances? Did you all do some form of climate survey that indicated a low sense of belonging or lack of community? Have coaches from underrepresented backgrounds expressed discomfort, or maybe some from majority backgrounds that have discomfort in talking about things that they don't feel pertain to them? Do you have student athlete affinity groups? Have they been formed? What feedback's coming from that? Is this push for DEI initiatives really saying, okay, this is something that feels like quote unquote low hanging fruit. Maybe we need to just develop a council. But this, to really start here, is to develop your why. Why are you developing this? What is the cause of this? And really getting real with that. So moving forward to that next component, which is after connecting with your community, really determining your why, going to that place of information gathering and analysis. A lot of us think we know more than we actually do. And when asked, okay, where did you get that information from, or what's validating you in that? It's kind of like, oh, it's just kind of my perception. And it's like, all right, that's good. As ADIDs, we do have a perception. We are attuned to a lot of things that are going on. But really, in order to continue to validate our work, we need to make data-informed decisions. And sometimes that data-informed decisions can be a little daunting, not particularly to our research folks on here. They're like, hell yeah, make data-informed decisions. But ultimately, we need to really start focusing on like, how are we going to collect data? And data, yes, can come by numbers. It can come by questionnaires. It can come by climate surveys. But experiences are data. People's stories are data, and it's what you're doing to capture that, so then you can validate the need to accomplish your why. But I really want folks to focus on what information do I have to validate that this is a need, and how are we then going to accomplish that? And Thomas and Amanda here in just a second are going to talk about determining who's a part of your program and a part of your team, and then also how to set goals. But it's really, really important that you start here to be able to validate. You can't know where you're going if you don't know where you're at. So then the next component, and this goes into after you've gathered your information, going into vision and planning. How are we going to do this? Oftentimes, folks will just say, let's get folks in a room and we'll figure it out. You can try that, but from a sustainability perspective, probably not your best angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this down into 3 different areas, is establishing the role of your team, creating an outline, and then ultimately setting clear expectations. So the first component of this is establishing your team, and this means establishing a structure that meets both the short and long-term needs of your department. So there's a lot of nuances to your DEI team, and these words, like a lot of DEI related words, will be used interchangeably, but there's differences in a handful of how these teams are created. So committee, and this is not universal, however, after doing a little bit of research, this is what I kind of pulled through the difference between some of these, the utilization and formation of these words. A committee often has voluntary membership that is reflective of the larger community, and committees are often there to provide support on specific programs, initiatives, et cetera, within the department. Councils are usually some form of elected or appointed membership, and they provide insight and perspective about where the organization is going. And in some cases, depending on the positionality, have some form of governance positionality where they're voting and then often have some decision-making power. Advisory boards are an engagement of advisors or people you're gaining advice from, and sometimes this can be external, but they're there to provide guidance to the entity, not directly in it, could potentially be in it, but to provide guidance on where the entity is going. And then also in this, similar to council, in some cases, they have decision-making power over the primary leaders of the organization. And then last but not least is like a task force / working group. These are very specific to a specific program or task or challenge that you're trying to accomplish. So as you're thinking through, okay, the development of what is my team, really thinking about the positionality and like what power, what levels of accountability does this organization have? Everyone's going to start at different places, right? So maybe you start with a committee, or maybe you start with a task force and ultimately want to get to a place of a council. Whatever works for you in your institution is appropriate. It's just really important that you understand like what you're actually tasking the task or your team to do. The second component is being able to creating an outline, like what the heck is this? What the heck is your team going to do? What are their roles and responsibilities? What does the membership look like? How long are terms? Are there terms? Is it volunteer? What do you do with vacancies? What time commitment are you expecting of folks? What are meetings going to look like? What are the structure of meetings going to look like? So as you're laying out your outline, this will help you again, before you get into the room with a bunch of people, having the structure set in stone is super important so that you're not trying to figure it out as you go. And then the last component is, this is super important, is setting clear expectations on the front end. Oftentimes, and I'm sure like me, a lot of us have been on committees where you kind of walk into a room and you're like, what the heck am I supposed to be doing here? Do I have decision-making power? Or am I just here to provide a perspective? Clarity before creation is super important in setting those expectations so people know what they're there to do. And asking a few follow-up questions. Why are we creating this team? What is the anticipated outcome? What decision-making power does this group have? How will this team and or organization be held accountable? Just a few questions to consider. And last but not least, before passing it to Amanda, I just wanted to tie in a few misconceptions and pitfalls about creating your team. Teams cannot be sustainable unless they have a plan. If there's no foundation, if there's no plan, it's not going to sustain. So folks are unclear on purpose. As you're setting your council or your task force or your working group or your board, be clear on purpose. Super, super important that you're thinking about what is my anticipated outcome with this. Another misconception or pitfall is that there's a lack of support or buy-in from leadership. This is super important to get things done, to have leadership endorsing in a lot of cases. And what Tom's is going to talk about is potentially having them involved. And then going back to what we started is that awareness piece to action. Oftentimes these committees, councils, task forces are created in a reactionary form. And sometimes that's necessary to respond to challenges and issues on our campuses. But ultimately, it's also super important that we're thinking about being proactive. Don't just go to do it to have a committee and post pictures on the website, but what is the actual committee doing to create long-term sustainable change? So I'll pass it to Amanda.
And I will go ahead and pass the baton to Thomas.
Thomas, I'm sorry, my bad.
All good. Thank you for that, Sheridan. Really appreciate the piece that you had here. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the who and who's on your team and how you select that. So every now and then you got to quote yourself. You know, there's a million inspirational quotes out there, but every now and then you got to quote yourself sometimes. And what I always say when people ask me how I started our Inclusive Excellence Council at the University of Arizona, I always say adequate representation matters. So you may hear from DEI folks all over the country, they'll say representation matters, which it does, but I think you have to go a step further and say adequate representation matters. So we will get into that over the next couple of slides. So how do you start this? Who should be involved is always the question. And so whoever's going to be the leader of this team, we call ours at Arizona the Inclusive Excellence Council. And so whoever is going to be the leader, which was me, we had to make the decision, will we hand select folks? Will this be voluntary? Should we just shoot an email and just ask people if they're interested in joining this committee? Or should there be an application process? So we started ours back in 2018, so kind of before this newfound love for DEI within college athletics. And so we were kind of taking things really slow and didn't really have a blueprint because we hadn't seen it done before. So we made the decision to hand select. And the way we did that, there were a couple of folks on our team who may have just reached out to the HR person about diversity and inclusion, or heard me talk about it and say, oh, I would love to be involved with that in some way. So we took those folks into account first, kind of vetted them out a little bit and make sure that there was some passion there and also some competence there, which we'll talk about on the next slide. And then after we hand selected some folks, that's kind of when we started to see some more interest. And then we vetted those folks as well and was able to form a 9-person team when we first got started back in 2018. So I think there's multiple ways to do it. I think if you hand select, you have to make sure that you are culturally competent, whoever the leader is of the group. And then you also have to make sure that there's going to be some bumps in the understand that there's going to be some bumps in the road because chances are not a lot of people have experience in this area. If it's completely voluntary and you just kind of send an email out and say, hey, who wants to join? I think you probably don't get the best candidate pool that way, just because I think a lot of times folks just want to be involved in things, especially if it's just a voluntary process. So be careful with that one. And then the last one, if there's an application process, I think, if there's some sort of, essay that you wanted to add to it, to ask, why do you want to be a part of this? What experience do you have with diversity and inclusion? That could help a little bit more, and that'll help you with, finding those folks who are a little bit more competent than probably your average college athletics professional. So either way works. We're almost 4 years in with ours, and the hand selection process has been great. I will say I do wish we kind of set, time limits to it, because we've had the core of the group has been with us since 2018, which isn't a bad thing. But once we kind of get stale in some of the programming or some of the processes that we do, it's kind of tough to overcome that, just because we've all just been ingrained in everything that we've done so far. So if I would go back and do it again, I would probably just say maybe there's a 2-year term limit, or a 2-semester term limit, or whatever the case may be. So just think about that when you're building your team as far as the term limits. From strategic appointments, I think it's important to have a diversity of folks, and not just gender or ethnic diversity, but diversity of positions within your athletic department. So we have staff, we have coaches, and now we have a student athlete that is in charge of our SAC, Diversity and Inclusion subcommittee, who will also be a part of our Inclusive Excellence Council. That position changes, so we'll continue to rotate that as the SAC Diversity and Inclusion leader changes. I think it's also important to have a multi-generational team. So we have folks in their early 20s, we have folks in their late 40s. And I think that's important, because traditionally that means you probably have some coordinators or some assistant directors, and then you probably also have some folks on the senior leadership team. And so what happens is, normally those younger folks, they have the energy, they have the passion, they have the ideas, but they don't have the power to actually put those into action. So you have that idea development from some of your younger folks, some of your more energized and creative folks. Then we shoot that up the ladder to some of the senior representatives that are on this team who have the ear of the athletic director, and that's what's been successful for us. So we have folks who are doing the work and coming up with the ideas, and then we have folks who literally their job is to bring those ideas to our athletic director when it comes time for the executive team meetings. So I would always consider that. If you want to look outside of your athletic department, campus representatives, whether that be from the campus diversity inclusion office is always good, or maybe a community council. At Arizona, we have diversity community councils, and they're heavily involved with the work that we're doing. And then coaches, I have them on here twice, but it's really important to understand that coaches' calendars are crazy. And so just be really, really intentional about the coaches that you invite to join these councils, because if it's the ones who just never have any extra time, they may hold up the progress of this group. But I do think it is important to have coaching voices within your group. We have a head coach on our team, and then we also have an assistant coach. So I highly recommend it, but just be aware that their schedules can be really crazy. One thing that we implemented in year 2 was subcommittees. And I think a lot of people have just getting started with their council, and they've added subcommittees when they first started, which is fine. But for us, we wanted to wait a year to make sure that our council was competent enough. We wanted to make sure that we were able to actually get some work done first before we brought more people into the fold. And what happened with that is now everyone sees a year's worth of work, and now people want to be involved. And then that's when you create those subcommittees, because now people understand the work that you're doing, the vision that you have, and that it's not just something that you're just going to sit on and say you're a part of this council and not do any work, but you're actually going to be expected to do some work. So if you haven't started your council yet, I would say wait a year for your subcommittees, just for the reason I just said, because I think that helps, and that's been huge for us. Next slide. All right, and some misconceptions and some pitfalls. I think passion versus competence is a conversation that you need to have as a leader and whoever's kind of getting this team together. I want passion. Obviously, you want competence as well, but you can have folks who understand how to do this work or understand what needs to be done. But if they don't have a passion for it, they're going to be easily distracted, and that work will show and won't be able to help you in your vision. But if you have someone who may need a little bit more education, but they're passionate about this work, they're passionate about helping people, they're passionate about making change for marginalized groups and our student athletes, those are the folks that I want on this team. Because at the end of the day, it is a passion project. I think diversity and inclusion is a new phenomenon with college athletics, but it's a passion project, and you need people who aren't going to conform to our normal systems when things get a little bit murky. They get challenged by a donor, or they're challenged by the university president. I want someone who's going to kind of stand up for themselves and stand up for the work that we're doing. And you get that a lot when folks have passion. Patience is key. I think a lot of times, especially since all the events that happened last summer, with the murder of George Floyd and all of that, people are just kind of jumping out there and making statements and being performative and wanting to do everything on the first month. I think you really need to take some time and do a self-assessment from a department standpoint and from yourself standpoint as well, and make sure that you're taking your time so that your work is sustainable and lasting the long term. Don't try to get in an arms race with this. There's people who have been doing DEI work for a few years now. Don't try to keep up with them. Do what makes sense for your department. So just have patience, and I think you'll be just fine. And then lastly, it's a tough line between adding folks for representation and then adding folks for tokenism as well. So if you start to think about recruiting people and you're like, hey, we don't have someone that has a disability, we should just reach out to the one person in our department that has a disability. That can feel like tokenism a little bit. So just make sure you're doing your due diligence and figuring out who actually wants to be a part of this. Representation is important, but don't just reach out to people just because they're a part of a marginalized group that you think should be represented on the council. Actually have an intentional conversation with them, and if they feel like it's something that they want to do, then go for it. But don't just target people because of their identities and expect them to say yes on that. So it's a thin line, but I think if you have an intentional conversation, it's pretty easy to understand the direction that you should go. And now I will turn it over to Amanda.
All right, so far we've learned from Sheridan the importance of determining your council's why and really establishing the structure and buy-in up front. And Thomas gave us a great rundown of who should be our star teammates. So now it's time for action and how we plan to execute. Seth Godin states that there's no shortage of remarkable ideas. What's missing is the will to execute them. So just a show of hands, because I know we're in a Zoom, if you've ever been in a meeting where there were so many ideas, thoughts, opinions being thrown around, but the moment someone asks, so who would like to take this on? There's just silence. Yep, see the notifications of participants' hands popping up, and it happens. And the thing with our DEI council is that we need to be very intentional on who is that Thomas just mentioned, because our council should be a council of doers and people who are going to do the work. So looking into our next slide, it is not productive and efficient when one person is doing majority of the work. So the number one place to start is with your goals. It can sound a little cliche, but it is so important and necessary, because it will serve as a blueprint of where your team is headed and a roadmap to where your team wants to go. And remember, thinking about with your DEI council and your doers, understanding that your doers are essentially the oil to the engine of your goals, and really making sure that that's how your roadmap is going to get accomplished, and really thinking about that. And with this next slide, I really just want to mention on how you can provide a table to accomplish those goals and what you should take in consideration when making it. And I want to preface that your table is not going to look like the athletic department across the other state like yours, because again, it is going to be really dependent on that why that Sheridan mentioned and the purpose and the needs of your specific athletic department. So of course, starting with your target audience, thinking about who is the target audience that you are trying to serve, whether that's student athletes, staff, or coaches, and you can be even more specific on your target audience depending on what your goal is. This will then be followed by the goal itself and then status, which is a personal preference of mine, because then you can kind of visibly see where you are in the process of that goal, whether you've completed it, are in progress, or haven't started yet. The next is, of course, the action and the execution of what your council of doers will actually do, then how you will measure the success. As Sheridan mentioned earlier, data will help us make informed decisions, but it is also a very important proponent on how we measure the success of the action and the goal that we are trying to accomplish. So thinking about the different methods of data that you will specifically be using for your goal. Then the most important piece that I have to highlight is that you absolutely have to have and note who will be accountable of these actions. One thing that I've learned is that accountability is a big differentiator between a successful team and an unsuccessful team. Then lastly is the time of when you plan to accomplish the goal, which you can decide what format that would be in, whether it's a very specific date, or maybe it's just the month, or maybe it's just the year. Now that I've given an overview of the template, I'm going to provide some brief examples for short-term, mid-term, and long-term, and how your DEI council will play a role in that. So for short term, you can see that the target audience is student athletes, and the goal is to celebrate, highlight diversity and inclusion, which you can see can be a little bit broad, but that's where we dive a little bit deeper into the table. So the status shows that we've completed it. This is something that we've done. And through this, our action was launching a social media campaign once a month, thinking about sustainability, that highlighted student athletes from diverse backgrounds through graphics, testimonies, etc. In addition to creating a calendar that included all national holidays and heritage months to educate, celebrate, and commemorate history. And I want to shout out Thomas. He has a great calendar of all those holidays and all those heritage months that you should keep an eye out for. So if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out to Thomas. Little plug there. But looking into that, thinking about the people who will be held accountable. So thinking about who in your subcommittee, maybe if you don't have a subcommittee, is actually overseeing something of that goal that follows under their purview. So in this case, it would be External Relations and Content Development Subcommittee. Shout out to Max, because he is actually ours for our team. So looking at, how is it that we can work with that subcommittee and work with our external operations for marketing and our athletic department in itself. And typically short term would be something that would be accomplished in less than a year. Now moving into midterm. So I'm not going to read everything, but you can kind of just see a glimpse. And again, your table is your table. Maybe there's some things that you feel you should add, but I wanted to really highlight the main components. So again, target audience, student athletes, goal, increase feelings of belongingness and build a stronger sense of community for student athletes. We are in the progress of this goal. Seeing as though it's a midterm goal and we have 2 to 3 years, our plan is to collect survey data for recommendations on opportunities to create engagement for student athletes. And to measure success, there's some examples, but one of them is, just kind of looking at the percentage of student athletes who are participating in these DEI affinity groups, programs, or events that we might have. And again, that could be through attendance sheets, that can be through testimonies, or again, whatever data you plan to use for your specific method. Looking at persons held accountable, our student athlete inclusion and engagement subcommittee, that was just a name to be thrown out there. But again, thinking about those goals and who that might fall under and who you should have under that accountability. And typically student athlete development, and I understand that some people might be wearing multiple hats. You might be the ADID and you might be doing student athlete development as well. But if you don't, making sure that those student athlete development folks and academics are tied into that seeing as though that it's very front facing with our student athletes and campus partners, because we do have a great collaboration with organizations on campus where there are different student organizations that you want to maybe provide those services for your student athletes as well. Then lastly is the long term. And this is something that I know that we all might be potentially trying to accomplish, but our staff and our coaches, increasing the percentage of underrepresented minorities and full-time staff. This is just a status of, maybe it hasn't started yet because we haven't built that partnership with HR, built partnerships with HR with campus to see what they're doing, but really working on increasing, opportunities for retention and recruitment and development in that sense. And looking at measures of success, percent of underrepresented minorities and full-time staff. This can also be done through exit interviews to see from testimonies from staff and coaches on, what is it that could probably be better provided in order to keep them retained and to elevate them as well, which is very much important too. And holding accountable, recruitment and retention subcommittee and HR committee as well, just to provide as an example. And we'll be looking about anything that's typically larger or longer than 3 to 5 years for that. So who should be involved? Well, looking at the misconceptions and the pitfalls, really highlighting again the accountability piece. If you do not have accountability tied to your plan, please add it now, because that is what is going to be the really big determinant of making sure that your program is successful. And it really is showing your commitment and your responsibility. When you give someone accountability, then they take on those actions of being responsible for that. And what I mentioned earlier is that your table is your table. Some have already been doing the DEI work before the incident of George Floyd's murder, or maybe are just starting because they didn't know that DEI was as important as it is. And then the last one is that DEI work is everyone's work and not just the DEI Council. Just because there is a title to a name, everyone should be having DEI embedded into their work. When talking about DEI, there's the comparison that it's hard work. It's hard work too, and it's hard work. So if you do have a heart, know that this is just as much a part of your work and that you should embed it into your work and understand that it takes all hands on deck and not just the ADID and not just the DEI Council. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to an exciting person, Marissa, to break down more of our breakout rooms.
Thanks, Amanda. Love the energy that Amanda always brings, and in fashion of her, just shout out to her, Sheridan and Thomas, for the great information that we've received so far today. Hopefully you all are really starting to look at see ways in which you can improve the council that you already have, or how to get started if you have not already. And as we mentioned in the beginning, this session will follow our flow of our general body meetings. So we are going to move to breakout rooms now. And for the breakout rooms, it's going to be a pretty small group, right? 8 to 10 people in a group. There's 160 of us on the call right now. So when you get into the breakout room, please introduce yourselves, tell them your name, your title, so we can really start to build a community amongst one another and not just talking to complete strangers. In this room, we'll give you 3 questions to discuss over about 20 minutes. Please feel free to continue to share information, use the chat to share resources, very similar to Thomas just did for us all as well. So the 3 questions that you all are going to get are on this next slide here, but I'm also going to put it in the chat for you. So what are the main challenges you are facing regarding your DEI team? What are some wins that you have experienced, seen regarding your DEI team? And who are your main influencers? In this, you don't have to answer them 1 through 3. You can jump around, but really use this time to learn from one another. A lot of us are in one-person shops or are doing this in addition to everything that we're already doing. So use this as your team. Use this as a space to collaborate with one another and to bounce ideas off of each other. So with that, you should see breakout rooms popping up soon, and we'll see you all back. If you could, please designate one person to be the note taker, to share those notes in the chat with us when we get back. That would be really appreciated. If it didn't pop up for you yet, sometimes you can click on the breakout room option and you should be able to enter from there. We're back. So we want to hear from you all, and I'm going to apologize in advance if you hear some background noise. Teams are lifting underneath me, so they're just getting it in. Okay, that's all the noise is. So we know that these 3 questions probably in conversation intersected a lot with one another, but as we practice reporting out, we're just going to go in order. We're going to start with the first question. Please put your responses in the chat, right? This is a community that we are building here. So if those of you that were not able to be in someone's breakout room, there might have been something that's really beneficial to someone. So we want to make sure we capture all of that information. So even if you do not get to share verbally, please take the time to put it in the chat as well.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely, Larry, what you got?
Hey, I got to catch up to you at some point, Melissa. But is this being recorded? Can we get this somehow if it's not?
Yes, it is being recorded and it will go on our DICE website.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Sheridan, is that right? Okay, I was like,
Also on the NCAA website. As well, right?
Okay, so it'll be both on the NCAA website and on the DICE website. I knew it was being recorded. Where it goes, I wasn't fully prepared for that one, Larry. All right, so we're just gonna go through starting with the first one. So if you would like to share verbally, please use the raise the hand feature just so we can manage responses. We'll hear from a few people on this one and then we'll work our way through. So the first question for you all was just a reminder, what are the main challenges you are facing regarding your DEI team?
Is this just like, is this by group or is this just like free for all, speak up?
Free for all, speak up.
Okay, so I know one thing I mentioned in my group is that we have a senior associate AD who has been tasked with DEI, but the problem is it's quote 20% of his job. So the actual time that he's able to dedicate to it, right? Like he has to pick and choose where those priorities are. And this wasn't a role that he had done prior. He's been with our institution for a number of years, but he was external relations. So I think for him, what I'm trying to do, and my colleague who's on this call, Annalisa Duarte, what we're trying to do is help him hold himself accountable. Because I really love what Amanda was saying about like the actionable component. So I'm not the ADID, and neither is Annalisa, but by becoming educated in this space, hopefully we can hold him more accountable and give him resources. Because I think if it's me and somebody says you need to do better at X, but nobody's giving me tools on how to do better at X, then you know you're just like treading water. And so my goal is hoping that we can give him those ideas so we can overcome those challenges.
Thank you so much for that. And definitely a great job on the accountability piece, and just reinforces that you don't need a title to be able to do this work. So thank you for being examples of that. Let's hear verbally from one more person on the challenges, and I see some coming in the chat, so please keep those coming.
I'm happy to share. Hello, everyone. My name is Demetrius McNeil. I am a member of the Lemoyne College here in Syracuse, New York. One of the challenges that that I spoke of in our group was representation at the leadership level, senior leadership level on campus, whether that's our athletics department, but also just our college in general. And then also burnout amongst our administrators of color. And so when there are incidents that are happening on campus, we tend to historically have been more reactive than proactive around that. And we are shifting gears around that a little bit. So happy with that. But you know, it takes a toll on everyone, especially the few administrators of color that we do have, when we're constantly being sought out for solutions to issues. So that's one of the challenges that we've run into.
Thank you for that. That is definitely a real feeling for many people. So know that you're not alone in that. I feel like I heard someone jump in.
Yeah, could I jump in with one more challenge? I think that we spoke of in our room, and I see some fellow colleagues of mine who I work with in this work and stuff, and I know it's a challenge is that the biggest challenge I think for a lot of us is that people don't understand how big this job is. You know, a whole bunch of heads are not, and I hope they get that on record. We all send it to our bosses, by the way, but it's like, you know, where do we start? So it takes time. First of all, our positions, first and foremost, are about what? Relationship building. Because nobody's going to want to collaborate with us on campus. We can't touch the student athletes. We can't touch coaches. We can't touch other administrators if they don't know who and what we are about. A lot of us, I had a person on our campus who is like the DEI person for our whole school. One of them, like high up, they deal with everything. They describe people getting into these jobs as normally, quote, falling into the work, which is true, because like a lot of times, especially if you're like a person of color or underrepresented in however way, as you said in the beginning of the webinar, they call upon you to do this because you're probably good at creating relationships, can speak well, and they're like, oh, you could do this work. But then we get in these positions and we don't have any training, like literally, you know, and then all of us who hold the title of ADID, that position has done a jump stop and reverse pivot over the course of the time that we've done the work, not to mention that, you know, the fire with what happened with the social justice world and everything. So the combination of all that things have made this like, we're trying to provide stuff, and we understand that it takes time, but a lot of people need stuff like 10 years ago. And even our student athletes, you know, needed stuff 10 years ago. And even the stuff that our coaches need stuff 2 years ago. So like, I know I felt in our breakout room and whenever I've been on calls with people who do this work, it's very reassuring and it's so supportive that other people understand exactly what it is I'm trying to do and that I am working, but like you might not see anything, but it's so complicated. And then many of us are working, this is the full-time job. Like this is it. You know what I mean? Like if you're just doing DEI and you're doing it right, that's it. You shouldn't be doing anything else. Now I get it, the schools can't do this or that. But to me, it's like, if you're really gonna be that serious about it, you need to free up the ones of us that are doing this as much as possible to do this, or you need to hire for it, because otherwise we're not gonna be meeting all the needs that our student athletes need and our coaches and staffs and departments need as well.
Yeah, Tommy, I definitely agree. And I just want to say, these challenges could be a whole nother session, right? Having the conversations around these things. So I do want to encourage you all though, and this is going to sound like a shameless plug, but come to the DICE meetings, because this is exactly what we do, right? We recognize that we are the only ones potentially in our departments doing this work. And we also recognize that we need to be poured into ourselves as much as we are trying to pour into those around us. So I invite you all to please come in and have these questions. And if things don't get answered today, because we do only have a limited time, we are here to continue to have those conversations. I'm done with question one, so I will, we can move forward, but I see AJ, you got your hand raised, so pass it over to you.
Yeah, as I'm sitting here, I just wrapped up my research on those that are doing this full time, men and women. And I just want to say, for those of y'all that are doing this ancillary to your other work, I just want you to pause and take a moment to recognize that you are trying to deinstitutionalize taken for granted norms and structures, and then you're trying to institutionalize new practices and ways of knowing. And that is extremely challenging and extremely difficult. And so if you're feeling like you're running up against the wall, it's because you are. That process of institutional change and altering structures and norms that have been long embedded and sustained is not easy work. And so I just wanted to take a moment I see a lot of frustration and angst, and I just want to acknowledge from an academic perspective and an institutional perspective as to why that is occurring. So thank you, Marissa.
Thank you for seeing us and saying that. Kayla, I'll pass it on to you to keep us going.
Yes, AJ, thank you, Dr. AJ. Thank you so much for saying that. I feel like that was just perfect and a perfect segue into this next question. So obviously, there are a lot of challenges, and like a lot of, at least our group, when we had a discussion during the breakout sessions, was on patience and how key it is. So now that we've acknowledged these challenges, I would just love to open this up to talk about some of the wins that you all have experienced with your DE&I teams in this work at your institutions, all of that. Just time to pour in some positivity and get this going and talk about some wins I think we could all use right now. Feel free also to just unmute yourself and talk and put in the chat as well. We can acknowledge both of those.
Well, I'd like to just say one thing, and then I'm going to throw it over to Chet. I'm going to put you on the spot, Chet, because I really like what you talked about, the wins in your campus and that survey, the athlete ally that I want you to speak about. But at Fordham, the good thing is that, it was really well put by, I believe it was Thomas, who said that some places are not just PWIs, but they're OWIs, overwhelmingly white institutions. And at Fordham, we finally recently just hired a CDO. About 3 years ago. So that for us has been a huge win, because now at least the conversations have begun, and you're no longer at a meeting, being one of very few faculty, when you go to the Senate, you talk about diversity and everybody's eyes would go to the back of their heads. Now you talk about diversity and everybody's actually paying attention. So I think the awareness is coming. Unfortunately, it took the loss of George Floyd and others to really bring us to this point, but at least we're at the point right now that the wins are going to come. maybe slowly, but at least there's awareness on campus. And Chet, sorry to throw you on the.
No problem. Thanks for pitching it over to me. I did just put 2 links in the chat to the Athlete Ally website. If you're not familiar with Athlete Ally, they do activist work primarily in the space of LGBTQ plus resources and education. And they put together a composite list of their Athlete Equality Index, which is an indexing of all Division I schools and how inclusive they are as it relates to LGBTQ plus inclusion. So feel free to check out those links. A great resource and definitely helpful. We were able to move the needle on our campus with some things related to our fan code of conduct and improve that substantially, as well as tapped into some resources related to our trans inclusion policy, as well as our all gender restrooms, and making some headway there on our campus with providing some additional spaces for all to use.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Woods, and I'm at St. Joseph's University. Some of the wins that we've had here with our DI working groups, we have 2 groups, one student athlete group and one with the coaches and administrators. And what we saw as one win that I'll share is that the adults came up with a lot of great ideas. And then once we shared those ideas with our student athletes, the fact that our student athletes were thinking along the same lines as the administrators and coaches in terms of what we want to implement this year really aligned. So having everyone on the same page as we move forward has been a win for us.
That's awesome. Thank you, everybody. Due to time, we are, as Marissa was saying, this is DICE to the core of us. This is what we do. And we're just super, super thankful. So just quickly, I'm going to share my screen and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A. Just wanted to share a little bit of information because I know folks are jumping off. Is what we're going to do quick is we're going to send a questionnaire in the chat. AJ so wonderfully created that for us. Dr. AJ created that for us. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a few minutes post this our time together to fill that out, gives us great feedback as we continue to provide all the great things that you might need. And then also as we continue this great partnership with the NCAA, the development of resources and connection opportunities, et cetera, that really helps validate making data-informed decisions, right? Also, we'll make sure to throw our DICE Athletics website in the chat as well in the case that you are not a member and are interested. We want to make sure that you have the opportunity to connect with us via that. We really want to stay connected. We really want to support. Everyone is going through such different things with so many different dynamics and at different level, different institutions, D1, D2, D3 with different resources. And our goal is to just make sure that like, 1, you don't feel like you're alone, but then 2, that we can help resource and set each other up for success. So stay connected. Us as the executive team, we're here as resources. We also share some job postings and have an open forum portion on our website that we engage with. And then also we will be having our next formal DICE meeting. It's not going to be super formal. It's just going to be a way for us to continue to get to engage with each other over December. We're going to have a mixer and it's going to be super fun before we get the ball rolling back in January with more of our official business. So all that will be shared with those that are signed up on the DICE website, but just wanted to share that as a visual. And again, we'll really ask that you take time to fill out that survey. That said, we have about 9 minutes and I would love to open it up for questions, and or we can kind of continue with the cadence of sharing some best practices, but really want to provide the opportunity to answer any questions that folks might have to our executive team.
Do you guys have separate breakout sessions or separate calls amongst different divisions so that we can take some of the best practice sharing and learnings from larger, well-resourced divisions and then be able to work with other folks and best practice sharing with, I'm in Division III. So, what a Power 5 can do and have the resources to do is not what we can do here at Carnegie Mellon. So do you guys have separate breakout sessions or calls based off of kind of like resource sizes?
That's a great question. I will say not yet. I know that is absolutely something that we've been pondering because that is something that has been shared with us just over the course of our development. So we're not even a year in from a public release perspective. That said, we're really continuing to find ways. So this is fantastic feedback, Monica, for us to think about how we can take that and create specific spaces, whether that's a part of our normal DICE meeting, or maybe it is something separate. So not yet, but again, your experience and your perspective just gave us some data, and we will absolutely find ways to accommodate that. Thank you.
And I'll add to that too, Monica, like we do talk about a lot of things in our DICE meetings that don't cost money. And I know a lot of times that's kind of the thought is when you hear from Power 5 folks, we're talking about the budgets and stuff. There's a lot of us who don't even have budgets and just kind of getting started. I didn't spend a dime on DEI until year probably 2.5. So a lot of the conversations I think will definitely help everybody on every level that we're having at the DICE meetings. But to your point, it is time for us to kind of start to consider breaking up our breakout rooms into divisions. So.
And I think it's to not even just on the financial resource. I think human capital resource too. I'm a head coach and I'm the ADID. So how I am resourced and how I have the ability to structure my staff subcommittees, given how small our department is, may look different than the folks doing the work. So just being able to kind of hear best practices from other folks who are even human capital resource similarly can help us kind of work to say like, oh yeah, maybe we can do that synergy or whatever.
And I'll just add to it was shared in the chat that there's some folks on here that are outside of athletics with the ADID designation. So potentially there's an opportunity as we're thinking about some of these different demographics, whether it's division, different schools, resources, maybe it's head coaches who are ADIDs or folks who are potentially on campus, continue to find ways to, connect formally through a DICE platform, but then also making sure that information can be shared with contact information so that you can connect with those folks. And that's one of the things that, in spite of the fact that it might not be, okay, we talked about this specifically in DICE, in the DICE meeting, I was able to see that person or meet that person who's doing that, the same role that I have at that institution and making that connection. That's also what we're here to do, is help bridge some of that. So thank you for that feedback. What other questions do we have? Thank you so much for that, Monica.
There's a question about the ADID database. I don't know if someone from the NCAA wants to take that.
So we have a list, right, of all of the ADIDs from each athletic department and conference office. However, we can't necessarily use that database to have a listserv where you all are chatting. And we had one of our programs, as part of the inclusion forum, where we had an ADID special session. There were several of you that put your email addresses and started your own mini groups. So we definitely would recommend that. Also recommending connecting with DICE, but for a variety of reasons, we're not able to have as of right now, an ADID listserv where you're communicating back and forth. But what I will say is that the Office of Inclusion is working on throughout the year, providing some opportunities where you all can gather, be hopefully not going to in person and or virtually to provide support, because we recognize not only from hearing from you directly, but also through the survey methods that's very important for you.
I would say too, Sarah, like it would be a little tedious, but like the NCAA directory online, if you're looking for just the ones in your conference, you could click school by school and it is listed, like the ADID ADID is listed with like the AD, the SWA on that directory as well.
Tony, I see you have your hand raised.
I do, and then I also saw the chat. Tonight, to my understanding, although there's not one present in ADID group, but we ourselves can start one if we wanted to connect with other ADIDs across the country.
Yes, and thanks, Marissa, because I don't think I answered that question initially correctly. So there is the database, right, where you all can utilize and see all of the ADIDs listed from various athletic departments and conference office, and you can start one as well. The Office of Inclusion will have a resource out to you in December that talks about ways to optimize the ADID, and we're really encouraging from the conference level for there to be groups that are formed within the athletic departments for all of the ADIDs listed within that conference. So to answer your question more directly, yes, you all can form groups within as well.
Awesome. Well, we are at time. So I just want to one quick put our Dice Athletics website in the chat. We would love to stay engaged with all of you. Just that this was just so fulfilling every time I get done with Dice meetings, and obviously in partner with the NCAA, I'm on cloud 9 the rest of the day. So I just thank you for your time. Thank you for those of you that locked in and stayed the whole time. But just really want to, again, humbly and so thankfully, just tell you how much we as a collective really just appreciate you. Continue to take care of yourself first and foremost, and stay connected so that you can be poured into. So with that, I'll pass it back to Naya.
What a great session that provided some helpful and needed information and rich conversation about building and sustaining your DEI council. We know the work is plenty and many times heavy and can be overwhelming. However, remember that this work is a shared responsibility and we cannot make up for years of stagnation. But what we can do is keep moving forward. One program, one initiative, one conversation, one collaboration at a time. Thank you to Sheridan, the DICE executive team, members, and all of you for joining us today. Please note that the recording of today's program will be available on the Office of Inclusion and DICE's website in December. Please join us on next Wednesday, November the 17th, for the second webinar on how to serve your campus community. This program is co-sponsored by the Office of Inclusion and the Minority Opportunities and Athletic Association. The program will offer education and tips to support you, our ADIDs, in developing resources that best serve your campus and conference needs. This session will focus on campus collaboration and alignment, navigating shared resources, and competing priorities. You will receive helpful resources in December that speak to how to optimize the ADID role outside of athletics, inside athletics, and on the conference level. On behalf of the Office of Inclusion, thanks again to DICE and to all of you, our ADIDs, who are making a difference in the DEI space at your respective institutions. Have a great weekend.